Welcome back to another season of the IFC's Individuation podcast. I am Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai. As always, the Wrecking Crew is with me. Dr. Eric Tomlinson is with us. Dr. Lisa Hong is with us. And we are happy and very excited to present a new season. This is our fourth season of the IFC's Individuation podcast. I don't know why we keep doing it. You let us know why you think we keep doing it. All right. So, our motto is to dive into fairy tales and read the fairy tale, break it up and introduce it and talk about it and talk about the different archetypal characters in it. So what we thought we'd do is in this episode, we're going to talk about the shadow, or as I like to say, the unknown other. Because they're really unknown to us. They're not like a shadow where you glimpse to the left and there's your shadow. No, it's something unknown. It's something covered. It's something hidden. But let's think about this. So in this episode, we're going to talk about Mindhunter. It's a series on Netflix. If anybody wants to watch it, it's great. There's 2 seasons of it. So in each segment, we will present a group of episodes, the narrative of that group of episodes, and talk about character development and who are the characters and who are we dealing with and why are we dealing with them. And anyway, so we're focusing on the hidden side of human nature, the side that we're afraid of, the side that lurks behind the walls, that unknown, that feeling of tension, that other that I'm afraid of, I'm scared of, I don't know what that is. So this is what we want to dive into. We want to find out why this provokes a reaction in us. So without further ado, Dr. Eric, you want to say hello to our listeners?
Greetings, my friends.
Dr. Lisa, you want to say hello to everybody?
Hello, everyone. I hope you can follow Mindhunter with us and join us as we talk about our perspectives as we work through the Mindhunter series. It's a really provocative, evocative, great character development show.
So without further ado, let's introduce our characters of the series. So who would like to introduce the characters?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what is Mindhunter, the who, what, where, when, why, about the show setting. So the settings are, please help me. I'm not
late 70s, early
Thank you.
80s.
I'm gonna say, okay, late 70s, early 80s.
In Virginia.
In Virginia, yes, we are working
with the FBI.
Focusing on 2 FBI agents.
In Quantico, Virginia, it's the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit called the BAU.
And what is the
you brought this upon yourself,
Eric?
You know that, right?
What's the BAU's purpose, Eric?
It's to try to add science to the understanding of killers, because always before they'd just been characterized as crazy psychopaths, and there's been no attempt to understand what creates them and how they develop.
Okay. So is that where the story picks up or develops into? When we were picking up the story, I understood they were just part of the FBI unit going around in the education department to train policemen on refined analysis methods to solve the crimes in their areas.
and that is, but the two main characters started injecting psychological profiling oriented understandings in it.
Right.
And then that was the springboard that launched them into a deeper analysis of that phenomenon.
Right. So our story, these two FBI characters, their names are Holden Ford and Bill Tench. And both of them are in the education field of the FBI through their common interests. And Bill Tench is a little bit more senior, has been there a little bit longer. Holden Ford's a more recent graduate, having been recruited into the FBI. They get paired up as Bill Tench needs a little bit of assistance with his work. And together, they start to have a more of a collaborative involvement with each other in discussing the cases, and the police departments who go up to them after their education series. Some policemen on occasion, they do some side consulting, and together they develop or start to identify, I should say, more identify common or ask the questions about why they're seeing this behavior that is uniquely different than a typical murder or crime of passion, so to speak, that maybe seem to be more violent than necessary, over the top in regards to the intensity of the act being acted out that they are consulting.
So I think what we're talking about is what ends up being the overall trajectory of their research. But when they start out, and this series starts out, these two guys are lost. They have no answers. They can't give any answers. And like two headless chicken walking around going, there must be answers, there must be, but where are the answers? So yeah, they get into that mode, they start to get in there, but that development takes time. And what you're watching is a development of consciousness. Is how is consciousness building? How are things being connected? What are we looking for? How are we researching this subject? So that's the fascinating part about the series, is what you're seeing in real time is learning. It's like they're learning and they're connecting things. Like, does this work?
And this makes me think about something else in the series of Holden being in a university setting. He is eavesdropping into other lectures of professors in the psychology and sociology department. He's curious. And in those lectures, those other professors themselves are asking similar questions. So there's a resonant connection and of research being published in other arenas where there is a collective vibration and discussion of curiosity of the same ilk as what Holden and Bill are interested in, which leads them to Dr. Wendy Carr. And Eric, would you like to talk about Dr. Carr?
Yeah, she's the academician, or what is it called? How do you pronounce that?
Academic.
She's the academic that actually gets interested in the work and provides a really interesting background from her perspective. Now, unlike the two main characters, who are based on two of the original people in the BAU, and if it's confusing, the BAU is what it's been called since 85, but prior to 85 in the show, it's called the BSU, the Behavioral Science Unit.
Yeah,
They
but what does
changed it.
BAU stand for? You haven't said that yet.
the behavioral science unit in the TV show in 1985 became the behavioral analysis unit.
Okay.
So it went from BSU to BAU.
Okay.
But she is she's a fictitious character. There was no Wendy Carr in the actual development of it. There were some other original profilers that provided some of that, but they're really not talked about and mentioned. So just because she's a fictitious character, it doesn't mean that what she represents wasn't there among a number of other academic-oriented profilers in this original batch, because they were there too.
Well, they're all fictitious characters. I mean, this is based loosely on other characters, but it's not like a docudrama.
No, it's not a docudrama, but
it's
it's taken from the book called The Mindhunter, which is what the series is. And The Mindhunter and much of the show is right out of the book, point for point. So this is we're actually seeing in a Hollywooded version, we're actually seeing many of the things that actually happened and were done in those original years in the BSU. So the two main characters are not, I wouldn't call them fictitious at all.
Well, what I mean fictitious, meaning that they're made up characters for the purposes of the show.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they don't have a hint in reality. They do, but this show is elevated in ways, and the Dr. Wendy Carr has a private life that she's hiding. So these characters have a depth of understanding, I think. So for our listeners, we're thinking about the episodes and these characters as our launching pad to navigate into understanding and seeing the unknown other. So how do we start to glean insight into this thing that we don't understand? This thing that lurks there, but we don't know where it is. And it appears when we feel safe. And it appears when we are not paying attention. So how does it appear? Where does it come from? And we've had when we talk about the shadow, when we talk about the unknown other, what we're talking about is development, psychological development. So this show also talks about psychological development. How do these serial killers how do they become who they are? So this is about development. This show is about how a child develops their understanding of the world and how it's structured. They also introduce terms for the analysis of these type of developments. And they start to talk about what the triggers are. And so they start to coin phrases that they use.
They also identify where the triggers come from, or possible theories of how they originated and how it is that the triggers elicit. What did they say? It wasn't, I forgot the name, the word,
Stressors.
Stressors. Yeah, thanks. Stressors.
Yeah. So they're adopting a language that describes the unknown other, because they didn't have a language before to describe them. What would they use, Dr. Eric? What the term they use? They use the term
Crazy. What?
They use the term crazy.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
That's the term they use to describe these type of killers, these type of sociopaths.
Yes.
They use crazy because Dr. Lee said it doesn't resonate. It doesn't seep in. It's like, why would anybody want to do that?
the extreme, the aberrant violent behavior. You could say it's
Yeah.
just inside the norm of normal violence.
Yeah.
It's actually become very personal about the types of violent acts. They were all just deemed crazy and put into a box, sentenced as what is such as what was evidence, but not really understood. And Holden and several other people analyzing this type of behavior are recognizing the frequency increasing and of this behavior, or being reported in a way and shared, that this needed to be understood in order to prevent it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was on the rise, and because then you forget, there was we forget, news and news reporters and papers didn't have that far a reach. They tended to be disconnected, like there's no internet. So if there's a story in a small town paper, it's not picked up by the large national papers. So these stories don't spread. So they're not connected. So at that time, they start to track crime. This is the time they start tracking crime. It's like, okay, they start to like gather numbers. And suddenly they realize, Dr. Lisa, this is what you're saying, that these are crimes on the rise, but they don't understand them. They call them crazy. So all these cases are crazy. That doesn't make any sense at that point, right?
Mm.
So it piques their interest, and Holden and Tench decide. Well, Holden goes with Tench to a training, an officer's training, and they basically blow it. They basically are not sure of what they're talking about. They have these phrases in their heads that they were throwing around, but they throw everybody off. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. So they realize that what they've been doing or going about wasn't systematic. It was haphazard, and it wasn't working. It confused other people, and it confused them when they thought about it. It sounded good. It sounded like, this is what I want to be talking about, but not quite. So development of the shadow, or development on the unknown other. The first thing that happens is the ego is a complex. When the ego emerges, the complex is triggered by a trauma. So the ego is triggered by a trauma. In its formation, a part of it also develops. That part is the part that is not acceptable in the world. What are the rules of the land that are acceptable? That other part holds the rules that are unacceptable. The more trauma there is, the more likely the development of this unknown other becomes radicalized. It's already there. It's already inputting all this information. It's already feeling neglected and hurt. But if you add pain, emotional pain,
Yes.
if you add psychological control and manipulation, and then you add physical pain, and then you press really hard, and what develops is a disturbed, or what they use in the show, Dr. Lisa, the term disorganized and organized. So they use the term disorganized. So something comes from that is either organized or disorganized, according to the show. but something comes out of that. And what comes out of it is the unknown other. And the unknown other, depending on, so when you are attacking a child, when you're traumatizing a child, the ego structure fragments. The unknown other becomes all powerful because it absorbs the other pieces that fragment.
Now, the unknown other, is it always a result of a fragmented ego, or can someone embodied also hold that unknown other? No.
Unknown other always exists. Always
Oh.
exists. In every structure, the complex, the ego is a complex. And when it wakes up, the ego has been triggered, has been traumatized by something. It doesn't have to be a major trauma. It could be you just realize, the ego just realized that it's actually not part of the mother's body, that it has its own body. And that scares it, right? Because they're not attached to the mother very well. So there's no security there. And now I realize that not only there's no security, I'm alone. And so that's what we mean by trauma. And what that forms is the complex. And in the complex, there's always an opposite. Remember, when we talk about Jungian psychotherapy or Jungian analytical psychology, we're talking about there are two spheres, right? There's a negative and a positive. You could go anywhere between the negative and the positive. But those spheres are disconnected in the middle. In the middle, there's a point where something becomes part of something and something becomes part of something else. So the opposites always hold. This is part of Jung's fascination with Chinese medicine.
Mm-hmm.
The opposites always hold. And so there's always an unknown other as long as there's a Lisa. And it can be a protective entity. It can be a menacing entity. It can be an angry entity. It can be anything that we are terrified of. The more terrified we are, the more dissociated we are from it, the more it leaks out into kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
So for this show, when we are looking at or discussing the unknown other in these serial killers, we are talking about a fragmented, highly disassociated, fragmented unknown other that is driving and overwhelms the overall ego. And
yeah, it's taken over. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's in charge now. That part of them where there's empathy, or in the episode where they see this kind of like a poor me, when the serial killer starts talking about poor me, not poor them. Why poor them? Poor me. So when they start talking about that, you start to see the fragmentation. You know, that used to be a piece of something. That used to be a piece of innocence. That's gone, right? But it still cries out. It's like an echo. So that's how you see the fragmentation, because then, Dr. Eric, if you want to talk about it, you know, in that episode where he says, I could snap your neck, you want to talk about that part?
Yeah, Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer.
They visit him in prison in this show.
Yeah, he's in prison. He turned himself in, by the way. They couldn't catch him because he had an IQ of 160. He's 6'9". He used to hang out with the cops at all the cop bars, by the way.
Yeah.
And they really liked him. And when he finished his killing spree, he called him up and said, "I'm the co-ed killer. Come pick me up." And they thought he was joking,
Yeah.
and laughed about it and didn't even go because he was done. He had finally killed enough people, and he killed the originator, in his mind, the originator of his trauma. And in some ways, it was true. His mother. He buried her head outside of her bedroom window, and he was talking to Robert Ressler, the profiler, who in this case is Bill Tench in the show. Although they show it to be John Douglas, it was actually Bill Tench that he did it with. And he said he was in the interview with him, and he was saying, and the guard had left and was doing his 15-minute round, and he said, I could just snap your neck and have it sitting on the table for when the guard gets back.
Yeah.
And Bill Tench, Robert Ressler, he believed him. He was scared to death. And so he started talking to him about a variety of other things to keep him talking. And then when he left the room, Ed Kemper looked at him and he said, hey, I was just joking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he
So
goes,
the sociopath,
yeah, I know you were. And then
the sociopath, jokes with your life.
yes.
Yeah. So the unknown other can menace you in ways and then say, "Hey, I'm not your menace. You're reacting, but I didn't do anything. I was just joking." And so the unknown other is that part that seeps in under your skin. So we have certain instincts towards predators because we have been preyed upon. We have been killed. We have been maimed. We have been eaten. We have been spit out. We have been digested. We have been burned. We have been chopped up. We have been shot at. Because collectively, as a humanity, we have evolved over time. But through the collective, we have experienced millions and millions of deaths. Through the collective unconscious, we have experienced it over and over again. So when that is unleashed, when the unknown other shows up, the collective rage is unleashed.
Yeah.
It's not a singular rage. I'm not just looking at one person. That person represents a whole group of people. And that group of people is what I'm going to punish. Go ahead, Dr. Eric.
I was just going to say, lest any of our listeners think that, oh my gosh, this could happen to me. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. These people have experienced in early childhood what's called the homicidal triad. They've been abused. They were fire setters. They were bedwetters, and I'm not talking about biological reasons. And they were also, they committed cruelty to animals. That's called the homicidal triad. This is this is wired into your central nervous system as you grow up. And then those stressors that Holden and Tench were talking about, and what Dr. Lahab was just talking about, when the two major stressors are abandonment, loss of girlfriend, loss of wife, and the other one is loss of job.
Yeah,
so
that's what they started with.
So a loss of life control in their present life is what spurred them on to what Dr. Lahab was talking about.
Yeah, so part of it is what they're talking about, Dr. Lisa, is they're talking about what they use as a surrogate ego. And the loss of that surrogate ego causes them to act out. So the loss of the girlfriend or the loss of the wife causes me to act out. Not that she could be a stressor in herself and her continued presence will force me to act out anyway. But I will more likely act out faster if that particular trigger hits.
Yes.
So are we saying a loss of a surrogate ego, is that the surrogate ego that replaces the original surrogate, which is their mother.
That replaces the original mother, yes,
That
because
replaces the original mother.
the original mother was sadistic.
Mhm.
So that's also part of the development. The mother is sadistic. She's emotionally controlling, and she tortures you basically psychologically.
For years.
And this is kept up, of course. This is not like breaking an egg. This is done over and over and over again
Yes.
until it imprints on the skin of the child, where the child starts carrying it. So when he sees a cat and he slices it, he doesn't think twice about it because it's not real.
Right.
And that's how they start. They start building this like, oh, this was so easy. I could do this to something bigger. And so that's when they graduate towards people,
It's a psychological and emotional release for them.
yes.
They for a few seconds they feel alive.
And then it's gone.
Yes.
And then
Well,
it
they
has to
take a
be
souvenir.
yeah, and it's like a quick high.
Yes.
It's gone, and now I'm lonely again.
Yes.
I'm in that lonely place where I just need to release it. I just need to release it on something. So the unknown other has taken over and now drives the bus over the cliff over and over again.
Fragmented unknown other.
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, the unknown other basically picks up the fragments of what is left of the ego. It swallows it up whole.
There we go.
So what happens is the ego as a structure reflects what Jung talks about, is that the ego is a tiny reflection of the self. It's this tiny reflection. So within the self is integrated. The shadow is integrated. When the shadow is integrated, when the unknown other is integrated, it's no longer unknown other. It's a part of me. And I know what it is to be a part of me. I have identified the pieces of me that were outside of me. I don't turn my head, I don't turn my face, I don't turn my eyes from what I know and see. It's a part of me. The closer it is to me, the better I am off. The farther away from me it is, the more dangerous it becomes. And we know this with trauma. And so part of it is that there's no treatment, there's no identification of what's going on with these kids. And by the time they get older, it's too late. But they haven't discovered that in the show yet.
No.
They're not even close. We kind of
No.
skipped ahead. So I'm going to skip back. We're going to roll back time.
Yeah.
So they have not discovered that. What they've discovered so far is a couple of things. One is that there's thinking behind this process. It's not crazy. So just that idea, just that small idea. Wait. It can't be crazy. It's got to be. They must know what they're doing. Then the second question pops up is like, why are they doing this insane stuff? Because this stuff is crazy. Okay. No. This has a meaning, but they haven't gotten to this has meaning yet.
But the fact that they understood that, or at least they believed at that point, they didn't understand it, but at least the two main characters at that point believed that these people had a logic behind it.
Yes.
It made sense to them. There was meaning behind it. It wasn't just out of the wacky, crazy, insane emotional reactions. This was there was planning involved
Yes.
and thought behind it.
Yes.
That's amazing at that time in
Yes.
history.
So they figured this out, that there's an organization behind it. There's an
Yes.
organized kind of working clock that plays it out and plans it out. So what they started looking for is pattern. Okay. So they hadn't even talked about it. They don't know what it is, but they're looking for patterns. It's pattern recognition. We talk about it all the time.
And even the disorganized killers had logic behind it.
It's a pattern.
Yeah.
It's a disorganized pattern, but it's a pattern because
Yes.
the disorganization carries from crime scene to crime scene. It's not particular to one crime scene. It's across the board.
Yeah.
Which they started to identify as a sequence. There is a sequence from one incident to another that reflects each other. They
Yes.
started to call it a sequence killing.
Yes.
And later they refined that to call it a serial killing.
Yeah. So that's, I think, a little further on, right?
A little further
That's,
on.
yeah,
In-
that's
in-
I
in-
think.
in-
Yeah, but you're right.
Definitely introduced.
You're
In the
you're
show,
right.
it was. In the show, it is a little later on, but actually Robert Ressler came up with the term serial killer 2 years before Tinch, 2 years before he ever met Holden.
No, but in the show, what
Yeah.
Lisa's talking about in the show is they identified stressor,
Yeah.
and then they identified what you're talking about, right, Lisa? Go ahead. So you're talking about sequencing.
Yeah, that was well
And then they
said,
called
Lisa.
it serial killing. But go ahead.
Sequence.
It was dropped, but the reasons why they switched the term has not been identified yet.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
they so far they're only loosely calling it a sequence.
Yeah. So I think I saw that part. That part, I think it was what is gonna work with the police and FBI. So they're trying to pick out words that kind of fit that mindset. They sound more technical than not. And I think as the show moves on, they move away from that idea.
The second round of terms that you're talking about is I don't remember the first moniker they called it, but it was said immediately once that word descriptor was dropped, they said, no, we need to make it more accessible that everybody can easily remember. Let's call the pattern or the expression of that sequence incident, how it got there, does it appear organized or disorganized?
Disorganized, yes. Yeah.
That's where they got to the organized, disorganized idea. Yeah. Which
Two
is
good
more
points,
pattern.
Dr. Lisa.
Yeah. So we have these characters, and we have a lot of characters. So we have Shepard, who is the unit chief. He's in charge of them, and he wants them to make as little noise as possible. He doesn't want to be embarrassed by them, and he doesn't want them to talk to anybody about what they're doing. So they need to keep it on the down low. Slowly, they get a place in the basement to work out of. So this is early on. They get a place in the basement to work out of, and now they have a place to work out of. So it's becoming more of a team, a group.
Yeah. It's the unit chief Shepard really does hear the value of what their curiosities are, but he doesn't want to displace his other network requirements. And so he allows them to exist in the basement begrudgingly, but he gives them a generous amount of hours a week, 10 hours a week on their job to do this. Is pretty good. I thought.
Yeah.
And it
He
was
gives
a
them
win.
like 10 hours to do it, and he banishes them to the basement.
That's right. You can't, and you can't talk about it, and only report to him.
Yeah. So if our listeners, if you are interested, it's Mindhunter. It's a Netflix series that came out in 2017. They did 2 seasons. It's a great show. You'll enjoy every minute of it. It's probably more 16 and above than any younger, because
Yeah.
there's violence, there's sexual scenes, there's some other stuff, but it's a really good show. So this is part 1 of our series. So we kind of introduced you to what we're going to talk about and how we're going to talk about it. In part 2, we're going to start picking up where these characters and what they're doing, how they are, their personal lives are involved in what they're doing.
And
Who
they
are
start
these characters?
interviewing some of the serial killers.
Yes,
You
and
start
they
meeting.
start interviewing and recording
Mhm.
the serial killers. So we start to get to have insight onto the serial killer themselves.
Mhm.
Who are they? Why did they do this? And where is this going?
Mhm.
So with that, it feels like a Halloween theme.
Did
With
you
that,
want, Dr. Lahab, did you
Yeah.
want to introduce the idea of archetypes?
maybe in part 2,
Okay.
we introduce the characters, and then we'll make it a surprise. We'll reveal their archetypes at the end of the episode.
Well, we invite you to watch the episodes with us and keep that
Absolutely.
in mind and go, I wonder what archetype these characters, and we're talking about Holden Ford, Bill Tench, Wendy Carr, Chief Shepherd, and even the girlfriend Debbie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Keep it in mind, play it around with your ideas about how it is that they're interacting with the world, how it is that they're collecting data, how it is that they exchange and develop their ideas, and to figure out, who do you think their archetype is?
Well stated. Dr. Lahab, could you mention the 4 main archetypes before we leave?
So the 4 main archetypes are king, queen, the lover, the warrior, and the magician, right? And they could be both female and male. There is no differentiation in the archetypal pattern. So gender does not have a differentiation. It could be they. The archetype is the archetype. Doesn't have gender. So it's gender neutral. Or non-gender, actually. It's not even neutral to gender. It's just non. Anyway, with that, this is the IFC's Individuation podcast. And we always sign off with, we are not afraid.
We are not afraid.
We're not afraid.
And we are the IFC's Individuation podcast. And we will see you, talk to you next week. Thanks, everybody.